only young jihadi who was stopped before an attack. MI5 reckons there are around 2,000 extremists in the UK who pose a potential threat, plus an unknown number of sympathisers. One of those sympathisers was Umar Abdul Muttalib, who tried to blow up a plane over Detroit. As a schoolboy in Nigeria, he had, just like Ahmad Munshi, discovered extreme Islam and posted his jihadi fantasies on the internet. His radicalisation grew during his 3 years at University College London. But just what drives these young men to extremism? It's exceptionally difficult to talk to those who've fallen foul of Britain's anti-terror laws. They often view the media as the enemy. But we did find two who were prepared to speak to a Muslim colleague. Rizwan Ditta was born and bred in Halifax. Like Ahmad Munshi, he discovered radical Islam in his teens. He's one of the angry voices of Generation Jihad.
You can go to any youth on the street and say, do you believe in jihad? They say yes. Do you believe that Al-Qaeda are a terrorist movement? They say no.
Last year, Ditta was released from prison after being sentenced to 4 years for terrorism offences similar to Munshi's. He's now out on licence with strict conditions.
I can't leave the address that I'm registered to be at between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I had to dedicate a mosque that I'll be going to regularly on Fridays just so they know where I am. And then at the same time, that mosque that I attend, they put cameras in there. And the Imam was approached and he was spoken to, and my case was shown to the Imam, and they go, this is the guy and he's going to attend your mosque, and that kind of thing.
Bilal Muhammad is Rizwan Ditta's friend. He too was born and bred in Halifax.
We come from a small town, from a small neighbourhood, so to be honest, everyone knows everyone. We go to the same mosque and that kind of thing, and I knew when he started practicing and all that, so I got to know him really well, and he was a very close friend, and I was a very close friend of the families.
Muhammad had a market stall selling DVDs and videos about Islam. Some of them extended into the more extreme political aspects of his faith.
The political section I had on my stall was the truth, and I wanted to promote that, to let the wider audience know, because I do believe the general person living in the West is brainwashed by the media.
Muhammad's politics would probably be unpalatable to many of us.
We're living at a time of war because the Western world's not letting anyone live in peace. It's the West who are at war with everyone. It's the West who started this war. If this country had to be attacked tomorrow by your neighbours or anyone else, it'd only be natural for you to defend this country. So why is it always different when Muslims get attacked? It seemed as terrorism.
Like his friend Rizwan Ditta, Bilal Muhammad has also been charged under Britain's anti-terror laws. He has the dubious distinction of being the first person to be sentenced under the new and contentious offence of glorifying terrorism. He served 2 years in prison.
I was the first, I don't think I'm going to be the last. I mean, I think this law just quietens every single Muslim up, where they can't express or feel their views. That's the thing that they want to remove from the people's hearts and minds, and that's the thing that want to stop people knowing from it.
I see it as a generation that have grown up, that are now conscious of who they are, they've learned their identity, and basically they've recognised the state of the Muslims globally, and they want to do something about it. So it's not a case of Generation Jihad, it's a generation of Muslims who are woken up. Everything in life it links back to Islam, from the way I dress to the way I deal with my family, everything. Even now, as I'm sat in the Bible, get my beard trim, I'm only going to trim it to a certain length because I can't trim it fully off. It's a practice of our blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to keep the beard as a Muslim. It's part of our identity, and that's what we do. Islam has its own Sharia, it has its own, rules and laws, and it has its own way of how we conduct ourselves, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in business, economics, social, judicial, everything. Islam has answer and solution for everything.
But most British Muslims have a far less literal interpretation of Islam.
There seems to be a very small number of people that are bought into this bizarre cult that to be a Muslim, you've got to follow the kind of societal, cultural protocols of 6th century Arabia. Yeah, now, I mean, what does that actually mean? Yeah, in terms of, it means you can't engage with the 21st century.
So how did these divisions in British Islam arise? Rizwan Ditta's background is no different from the majority of British Muslims.
My family originated from Pakistan, but the origins and the story, just like many other people, came here in the 70s, economic migrants, and just been doing the same thing ever since, working hard, establishing life here and raising us. I haven't come from an affluent background, but at the same time, I never was, I've never been a victim of, you could say, poverty or any kind of, family breakup or any problems like that. I never had anything like that.
Ditta's father arrived in Britain in 1969, part of the last big wave of Pakistani immigrants who were arriving in the 50s and 60s. He went to work in Nestlé's chocolate factory in York. Like most new arrivals from Pakistan, Ditta's family were Barelvis, followers of a moderate school of Islam. Most of these immigrants had great pride in maintaining their Pakistani culture, a reminder of the land and traditions they'd left behind. Their religion was just part of that. Women covered their heads, but only with a thin veil like the custom back home. The men were usually clean-shaven and wore Western clothes. There was no hint of radical Islam.
As Pakistanis, we've had a lot from this country. My dad came from an uneducated, very rural, deprived background, and he was raised as an orphan. He was a great businessman. In fact, he was so highly regarded in Bradford that, he was sorting everybody's mortgages out, and he had a branch of a building society which was, iconic.
Most were prepared to live happily alongside mainstream British culture. By the early 80s, Rizwan Ditta was attending primary school in Halifax.
The schools were predominantly white, they're predominantly English children. And then slowly, bit by bit, you had more and more Asian students there. So when I first went to my secondary school, it was predominantly white. Friends were mixed. Friends were whether Asian or English.
Bilal Muhammad started school in Halifax a couple of years later. By then, attitudes had begun to change.
Growing up was quite tough. Back in the 80s, there was quite a lot of racism. Primary school wasn't too bad, but growing up, going out to the local areas would sometimes get quite tough because there used to be a lot of pubs and bars around at the place. Just going out there and they'll be like, you packy, that kind of stuff.
Racism against British Asians became endemic in many parts of the country. Most suffered in silence. But in the late 80s, a landmark event changed the way many young Muslims came to regard themselves. The first seeds of Generation Jihad were about to be sown. In 1988, the novelist Salman Rushdie published The Satanic Verses.
He's a devil, the true devil himself come to life.
The one thing that gave our parents comfort in the face of all the hostility of the NF and, the rest of it, the Quran, the scriptures, the holy book, their faith, which they practiced very privately, was suddenly seen as being under attack, and many people thought, right, enough, we're not having this anymore.